This is RegCast, your edge on RegTech, risk, and regulatory transformation. Hosted by RegTech pioneer PJ Giammarino, RegCast delivers regulatory clarity, AI precision, and market trust with expert insights from the front lines. From MiFID III to AI, we connect regulation to execution, charting the path to credible compliance before gaps become capital or reputational risks. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or at regrisklegalsolutions.com and stay ahead of the regulatory curve. PJ Giammarino is one of the original architects of RegTech. With a career spanning Barclays, McKinsey, and his pioneering work at JWG Group, PJ has spent the last 20 years helping regulators and financial institutions decode complexity and transform compliance into competitive advantage. Now, as CEO of RegRisk Legal Solutions, he's at the forefront of AI-enabled regulatory intelligence.
Hello, I'm PJ Giammarino, founder and CEO of RegRisk Legal Solutions and one of the early pioneers of RegTech. Today, we continue Season 6 with a look into our old friend, MiFID III. It's going to take us a couple of episodes to get through this, and I'm really pleased to have some friends here that have been with me for a while. I've known MiFID for 20 years now, and it's now an 18-year-old, but it continues to be a key part of my life. And on the journey with it, I've met a lot of great people. And I'd like to first let Dawd introduce himself because he's been there for the vast majority of that time. Dawd, can you please introduce what you do?
Good afternoon, PJ, and thank you for inviting me to attend this webinar. I am Dawd Haque. I work at Deutsche Bank AG London. I work in a role called Market Initiatives, Regulatory Transformation and Strategy. Internally, I advise all our businesses globally on their regulatory footprints on new business, new transactions. Externally, I am chair of the Bank of England's Data Standards Committee. I'm a member of the advisory board for transforming data collection for the Bank of England, FCA and PRA. I'm the co-chair of the DSB-ANA's Product Committee. I attend the DTCC Steering Committee. I'm on the advisory board of the LSEG reporting group. I am a member of IST12, the UK Financial Services ISO Committee. I'm a member of the TC68 Standards Advisory Group, and I'm also a member of many, many working groups and committees at trade associations globally.
Thank you. And on the next episode, when you introduce yourself, just say what you're not part of.
Okay. Will do.
Thank you. Grant, over to you. Who are you?
Hi, I'm Grant Haley, First Derivative. I'm the practice lead for our trade and transaction reporting practice in EMEA. We help firms overcome and work through challenges related to trade and transaction reporting.
Yeah. Let me just try to kick this off with a bit of an explainer for everybody. MiFID is not always easy to follow. It's been particularly difficult this round because there have been many different parts to it, and frankly, it's now fragmented across two different, completely different perspectives from the regulators that are implementing it. So let me just frame it as, firms have really been told right now to get going with MiFID, but then all of a sudden freeze it. And the messages are all very confused. This is not downtime. This is your chance to shape what your reporting infrastructure is going to look like in both Europe and the UK. And if you wait, you're going to just fall behind, and you're going to be forced to rebuild without budget and influence the right kind of structure. So it's very much happening now. And what's happening in Europe, in response to some interesting industry pressure that some of Dawd's committees were able to bring, Commission has hit the pause button on a roadmap that was very aggressive. They launched twin consultations on Monday, the 23rd of June. That were not foreseen, not planned in the implementation schedule. Everyone was expecting to have an implementation up and ready for the end of the year. All of a sudden, they were told to stand down for the summer while we work out some very, very difficult options that are on the table. And those options were either to strip back the duplication across the reporting regimes, so not just MiFIR, but EMIR and SFTR as well, or build a single unified report once framework. Right. So for the first time, we're now having an architectural conversation about how should all these regimes come together. And given that they came out sequentially, that's never been done, and it is hard to come in and think about the rationalization. But the fantastic news and the nugget hidden in the 23rd of June consultation, it was that the Digital Regulatory Reporting Initiative is referenced for the first time. They call it machine executable logic in the integrated architecture. So it's finally there. A lot of the things that we've been looking at informally and pioneering and helping to get out in, for EMIR refit and all of the other derivatives of the trade reporting that have been going on globally, that's all very much part of what we have the opportunity to think about for MiFID III. This is not going to be a deregulatory environment. In fact, it's going to be the opposite. The data is still going to be required. It's very clear in the consultation that they're not going to be stripping any of this back. So what's happening in the UK is slightly different, but also moving in a similar vein. So the consultation papers were not aligned on some of the details, but they one thing that on this side of the channel we're looking at doing is coming up with a new rule book and having its own chapter, and then having it a way to think about the standards, which Dawd referenced earlier. So there's some real opportunities to think about not only what the rules are published as, but how the firms can consume them, and think about then working those into their business as usual, which is fantastic news. And there's even a tech sprint that the FCA has announced here in the UK as well, where we have a chance to focus on all that. Now, in terms of then the firms, we've been doing some survey work really for the, Grant, how long has it been? It's really all year long.
6 months, yeah.
Having dinners and talking with people. Our forthcoming research report shows that firms are mobilizing now. 85% of them already had programs up and running and been planning to get their analysis done by the third quarter, so right after summer. But that's not going to be perhaps a bit on hold while they look more structurally at what the overall proposals might mean that are now on the table. But the bottom line, and one of the key messages here, is that we have found reporting the quality that the firms are producing is causing them to have a low confidence level in what they're doing today, right? So fundamentally, firms are moving in part because they know that there's some challenges that they're going to have to face. And there's been an EMIR program that's followed on by a MiFID program. And there's an opportunity then to think about uplifting and coming up with the better architectures and better ways to getting this data out and produced. So the big so what here is, don't misread this moment, or you're going to pay twice, right? The ECB has already made very clear there's a supervisory exercise called SREP, where they're going to be looking at the quality of your data as part of your capital assessments for Pillar 2 and such. The FCA Market Watch, the recent one in November, I believe, we talked about all 81. The poor quality data. Say again?
Yep. 81.
81, that's the one. Yep. And really, this reset is about that, and the data quality that they're getting today, as much in the potential penalties as it is about the way we're thinking about doing the reports. So really, by early 2026, we're going to have clarity on a lot more consequences and how those things need to be done. And if you're rebuilding late with less funding and zero influence over the rules, you're going to be far behind. So this episode today matters because we're asking, what does this reset mean on both sides for the roadmaps that the industry are pursuing? And then how does this data quality now directly impact the risk profiles that folks are trying to manage? And what is it that firms can be doing between now and the first quarter of next year? Because this really isn't just a policy update. This is your chance to stop patching, start rebuilding, and help think about shaping the next version of regulatory reporting. So without further ado, Dawd, I'd like to come right back to you. Your thoughts about what this really means.
PJ, that was a very impressive summary, but it's also, you're asking very big questions, many of which don't have answers right now. So what we know and what we surmise is that there has been pressure put on ESMA to rethink the responses to the consultation, which have led to the draft RTS 22 changes, because they didn't, in fact, meet the goals of reducing burden and decreasing complexity. That's a theme that's been going across the whole of the European Union for quite some time, and we've got to be cognizant of why. The why is that firms in a thin market are spending too much money on regulatory compliance and don't have enough left over to give to the real economy to kick it started, right? So that's what the end goal is, to reduce the burden on firms so that we can have more money to spend, well, to loan to new and small and medium enterprises so that they can make the economy grow. Our risk appetite is low because our capital requirements are high. You can see that with Basel III, that's been delayed. So that's the geopolitical context we're working in here. And so beyond that, we now need to go into the what that means for the regulation. So ESMA has hit pause on the new RTS 22 changes. So it looks like now, as of now, there is no certainty that any of those changes will come into force at all. If they were to bring them into force, it would run counter the consultation that they have issued on the 23rd of June. So it doesn't make logical sense that they will come into force at all. My current guesstimate is that we will hit pause until the consultation is over in September. They will review the consultation responses and then will tailor the changes to RTS 22 and beyond based on those consultation responses with a 9-month to 12-month compliance period. So we're looking probably sometime around December 2026 to make any changes at all to MiFID II in Europe. And they will be modest because any changes that we do bring in are basically going to be ripped up when they move to whatever they decide to do based on at least their 4 scenarios in consultation, if not beyond that. So they can only really tinker around the edges. Now that is also going to lead to regulatory divergence between the EU and the UK, obviously. And it was anyway, because there was no way the UK was going to implement anything that the EU had put in or drafted up for changes to MiFID. Certainly not the increase in fields, certainly not the removal of FERTs and replacement of that to be put on firms, which would be a huge uplift for us. The extra additional fields, including linking IDs through a chain and all of that, which would have been horrendous for us to do. It was at least going to double the effort of creating a MiFID report from where we were today.
Just in Europe, not the
just in Europe. So I think, and the UK has already indicated they had no interest in doing any of that. If anything, they're going to simplify by going from the OTC ISIN to the UPI, which would have been a huge positive change for us in terms of transparency of what's a reportable instrument, where, etc. So I think the UK is going to keep a very close eye on what the European Union does. They will continue to follow their own path, though, and I think the European Union has been influenced by the UK here, in that the UK has been very much looking to simplify and lower the burden on firms while keeping a supervisory watch. So it's not deregulation, it's right sizing is more the way I would propose, because as I've said to you many times, and I'm sure we have across the industry, is that if you look at MiFID, it's a market surveillance. Most of the fields in there don't make any sense. Why are they there for market surveillance? It's the same if you look at EMIR and systemic risk. Why are all those fields there for systemic risk reporting when they have absolutely no impact on systemic risk? So it's right sizing for the original obligation is what we want to get to. I have lots more thoughts, but I'll come back to those later. So I'd like Grant's view on this topic as well.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Dawd. And all of what you've said is absolutely true. Only last week I was at a conference, and there were rumours that ESMA was going to be putting MiFID III on hold. And the message from the conference was, look, don't expect a delay, keep going. This always happens, right? And we saw it in EMEA, and everyone was talking about, there'll be a delay, right? And it didn't come to fruition. However, it was clear when I was speaking to firms that they bought the rumor and sold the news, right? We saw that there was a hint that there was going to be a delay, and we were hearing from firms, look, we've decided to shift our priorities and start to look at other things, right? And so a lot of them had shifted their priorities to look at other books of work before the announcement on Monday. And a lot of them, right, these regulations are back to back, right? There's a number of them going on at any one time. Firms have only just got over a mere refit. The UK regulation going in and the back reporting required up until May this year. And that firms are still trying to get on top of the backlog. And that's what we've heard a lot of them are shifting their priorities to, is to start to work on the day two stuff that they haven't had a chance to work on. Looking forward, though, firms are looking at their tech stacks. What does that mean, right? What improvements can be made? I think that historically, they've built in a rush, right? And I've worked in remediation, trying to help firms overcome and get on top of their backlogs. These solutions are put in a rush, right? Band-aids upon band-aids, and not really something strategic to think about in terms of how they've been built. We need to regulatory report, needs must, we meet timelines, and not really put too much strategic thought into how they build their solutions. We are starting to see firms looking at AI and how that can help them improve their data quality. And as your survey results show, PJ, they seem to lack the confidence in their data, and they're looking for opportunities with the likes of AI to see what they can do in terms of improving their processes, improving their data quality, and applying that artificial intelligence to help them with that.
Yeah, and just to underscore that point, I think we can't make a big enough deal of it. The ESMA itself published a data quality report not long ago, a couple months ago, right? And the quantum of data that we're actually talking about was really striking. It's 7.7 billion transaction reports a year, but that's just Europe.
Yeah.
Now, you look at the UK, it's another 7 billion a year, right? And then you start thinking about, okay, I'm going to I might have one trade between the two, but I have two regimes to report to now, and I have to do all this additional processing around them to make sure those are right. Oh, and the kicker is they're now on this AI data fabric. So, if we don't get this right, the regulators will be ingesting this on either sides of the channel, thinking about it differently because they've modeled it differently internally, and come up with completely different conclusions about what was market abuse and what was systemic risk. And the systemic risk from an EMEA standpoint, of course. But, ultimately, that's where this goes. And I think that's this data quality and AI risk that we're all very much aware of, which I think in part was what was behind the thinking about reframing this as let's think about the strategic architecture. But Dawd, how do you explain this whole move on either side of the channel towards machine readable and AI?
Well, you and me both have been on MDMER, remember that back in the day? Machine readable and executable code from a regulator. Grant Thornton, us and the FCA worked closely for, must have been a year and a half, 2 years, on at least trying to get to a conceptual level of how that would work. I know that DG FISMA have done a similar, and the European Commission have done similar amount of work on their side around at least machine readable rules. There's been a great deal of question around data dictionaries, semantically accurate text, embedding code in regulatory text so that it can be just picked up and used to drive what a report would look like, what a good report, what does good look like? that's the problem when you read unstructured text and you translate that into a requirement. Everyone translates slightly differently, right? And it doesn't mean that any one of those translations is wrong, is because there is no harmonized approach to how to read a regulation.
But now talk about it. Give us an example. Give us a business context example about how two firms can think completely differently about the same kind of trade.
Well, what is a trade? Okay, let's look at it from an EMIR perspective, because we need to separate EMIR and MiFID, right? Because EMIR is systemic risk, and it's all about a set of attributes and what level of credit risk you're taking against whom. That's essentially what you're doing. Whereas MiFID is all around market surveillance, okay? It's who's trading with who, where, and at what price, and where is the market at that point in time, and what information have you got to hand when you're making that execution. That is market surveillance, right? So these are completely different pieces of regulation with a very different lens on each. But if you look at EMIR, for example, you've got a string of attributes and values. Now, that can be, you in your own firm will have a way of executing, a way of booking, and a way of transferring that data down your stack into your reporting engine. You then have to enrich it with a set of market data and also reference data, both on yourself and on your client. How you populate that report is basically a set of translations that you have built, a logic you've built based on the regulatory text, and that's your own translation of that. You can get some help from trade associations and people like Derivative First, and other organizations are available to help you understand those obligations. But it's very rarely, it's like anything. If you get two people looking at the same problem, they will come up with slightly different solutions. When you look at the multitude of different instruments that are traded on the multiple of different scenarios are traded in, you will always find that there are variances in how we interpret. And that's where the data quality issue comes into play. We both think we're right. You don't send a report to the regulator knowing it's wrong, because you think your interpretation is correct. What it is, it's just different from somebody else's interpretation. And it's how we iron those out is the key, isn't it, really?
And your example is specifically for EMIR, where it's a string of data that you're just sending out. MiFIR gets even harder than that, right? Because it's about the purpose behind the trade.
Much harder. It's a lot more perception than empirical, which is where you have EMIR. But I would caution here that making something machine readable and executable doesn't change that risk, because it's all about your internal data architecture then, how you have labeled your attributes and your trading, how you've captured the trade. So you're just moving the problem further internally within your firm, and maybe obscuring some of the risk of incorrect reporting. So I don't think this is the magic bullet in and of itself.
Well, I think you put your finger on it, right? And maybe Grant, for you can come in here, but it's those scenarios. It's the trading. It's how do we interpret what the regulation asks for the context of our business and what this regime is asking us for. Tell us what it's like going into a firm and trying to understand whether that logic is correct.
And, I think you're absolutely right. And Dawd's hit the nail on the head, right? And we see it time and time again, and this is what our consultants deal with on a daily basis, right? It's, how does one firm interpret a particular piece of the regulation, and how are their counterparties reporting it, and how is it different? And I think that, that is one of the areas that, we excel at, and working with firms, compliance and legal departments and external counsel as well, to work through in terms of, what is, their interpretation of a particular part of legislation, and getting that agreed within that business, so that they are comfortable and within their risk appetite to be able to report it in the way that they feel is accurate. But we're talking about executable code and machine readable legislation. We are seeing a lot of firms that are interested in CDM and digital reg reporting, but they're also lacking the budget, and they're also lacking the resources with the skills to do this. And we're hearing that, the biggest challenges, I think everyone's intentions are good, right? Everyone wants to head in that direction. But we're also seeing that the biggest challenges that we're hearing from firms in terms of the adoption of CDM DRR is that it's that initial integration, right? Everyone is really trying to just keep their heads above water in terms of the reg pipeline that they've got coming down the line. They have budgets to be able to deliver that within their not less than ideal tech stack. And we see that as, and it's the integration, right? It's the mapping to that within your complex architecture as it is today, and that's a heavy lift, right? And we're looking at opportunities as to how we can help firms to make that more efficient and reduce the burdens on firms to take advantage of this, to remove some of this ambiguity which exists within European regulations.
And so you have an opportunity now to kind of provide more value as you come in because you're able to map to a common language. That is effectively what the common domain model is a way for everyone to talk about the same trade
thing
life cycle.
in the same way. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, tell me a bit about, for people listening to this that don't understand the difference between transaction reporting and prudential reporting. Why is it not the same kind of problem? So like when I talk to regulators about, IREF and how they're exchanging data, they have a common model. BIRD is another common model. They have data models that say this is what a counterparty is. And, these are the kinds of things that they're used to in their world. And when you get into a transactional world, the ability to do that seems to fall away. Why is that?
I mean, from my perspective, I think historically finance is an industry that is built on acronyms and the ways in which people describe things, right? That is fundamental to financial services in its inherent nature. Everyone refers to things in different ways, and it's almost a language within itself and how people speak, right? So I think that the transaction reporting world is very trading focused and focused on how people trade. Whereas, the prudential side is, to my mind, very much more numbers. This is what we want. This is the calculation we expect, and a bit maybe less ambiguous in that way.
Dawd, I mean, your work at the Bank of England FCA Data Standards Committee must be looking at some of this. What are your thoughts on, whether you can extend the domain-specific languages to include prudential risk and statistical reporting?
We're certainly looking at that. Recently created a bridge between the Bank of England and the ECB around statistical reporting, and an interesting project around making the data more granular. Instead of asking for calculated values, we'll ask for the underlying value data and then do the calculation on the regulator side. So we can see some of why the calculations are what they are, and then we can also reuse that data for other purposes as well. Hopefully leading to a reduction in the number of requests for data from firms. I don't think I would characterize that prudential data has less inherent errors in it. If you talk to the people at BIRD over at ECB, they will tell you that they get a huge number of errors every day that have to be cleansed. So I think what we would see is a data that's dirty is different to the stuff that's happening in trade and transaction reporting. Doesn't mean it's necessarily that much better. It's also harder to spot, because a lot of the data that goes into prudential reporting is calculated data. And so unless it's out by a certain percentage, it will just seem like that you've changed your curve a bit, and it's not the. So I wouldn't characterize it as, and I certainly wouldn't. It's interesting. We have considered BIRD, and we are looking at BIRD as a model for use, but it's more the framework rather than the underlying attributes and the validations that we would possibly take.
So in other words, a banking industry reference dictionary or data model is only going to get you so far, and being able to communicate externally. Once you then start talking about internally, you have a much more complicated picture.
I think fundamentally, right,
Yeah.
It goes back to a point I made slightly earlier, which is that at the moment, the regimes in trade and transaction reporting have gone well beyond their original mandate.
Yeah.
We are being required to ask supply data which isn't even our own. The number of counterparty fields that we need to populate on our reports to the regulator is just too many. How do we maintain the quality of that data? We aren't that of a firm, we are our own firm. If it was just on our side and then the counterpart, especially on a dual-sided reporting regime where they are reporting for themselves anyway, I don't think it's justified that we should be reporting so much of their data. Their LEI should be more than enough, right? Legal entity identifier. And then beyond that, it's up to them to provide their own data, not for us. There's lots of other fields where I would say the same thing. It's outside of a perimeter of our firm. If you look at the way we manage our risk, if you look at the way we do settlements, the quality of our P&L and the amount of collateral and margin and how we manage those very key areas of risk within our firms, there are hardly any breaks on a day-to-day basis. And the reason is because all of that core data which is used in those processes is the data we transfer between firms, and it's key to all of us. It's the economic terms. Okay, it's where we settle, how we settle, what the underlying legal definitions are. So if we stuck to the legal certainty areas and said, okay, that's what we need to regulatory report, the level of errors would go down quite considerably. But the perimeter is much, much wider. It's things that we don't transfer between firms on a day-to-day basis. And that's why I think the error rate is so high.
Yeah. So I guess let's just try to frame this for senior managers listening about what actionable insights they can take away for the second half of this year. Grant, what practical advice would you offer to firms on their roadmap right now? We've just talked about a whole range of potential risks that could be coming at them, or some very difficult consequences in the fast-moving conversation. But how do you advise your clients now about where they should be going?
So I think we've spoken about data quality, right? And I think that's fundamentally what underpins all of what we're talking about in terms of transaction reporting or prudential reporting is data quality, right? And I have a bit of an analogy, and to me it's the regulatory reporting that firms make is the window by which the regulator gets a view of that organization, right? And through the data that they provide, there are trading functions and processes and systems and margins and collateral and settlements and all these different functions that exist, right? And it is aggregated at the transaction reporting, and that's where it becomes visible for the regulators. So certainly, firms should be ensuring that they have, the static data, right? Good quality static data, right? And building, pre-submission controls, certainly to stop it going out the door incorrectly in the first place. But also, having static data checks as well throughout, your organization to make sure that the quality of your data that you're sending is good. I think also, building a culture and a behavior of when you identify an issue, right, how do you prevent it occurring again, right? And so starting to build that into your organization, behaviors and culture, okay, we've had an error, how do we stop that happening again? How do we improve our control framework to prevent it occurring? And then I think they're expecting to see, your regulators are expecting to see pre-submission controls, right? They're actively asking firms, when you get an Haque, what controls did you have in place to prevent the erroneous reporting in the first place, right? So it's really, I think, focusing on that data quality.
Yeah.
There is always a balancing act, right? Firms are there to make money, and I think back to Dawd's point is, that's what these banks and firms are inherently there to do, right? Making money and doing the trade, right? And if the static data for a particular client wasn't there and the LEI wasn't quite correct, they're not going to not do that trade, right? And it's making sure and having those preemptive controls in place to make sure that you do have that data quality. I guess a couple of other things that firms can be doing, ensuring that you've got that independent quality assurance assessment happening, right? A lot of firms we've heard, they're doing their own homework and marking it, and whether that's sufficient or not is arguable. But having that independent quality assurance is really becoming more important. And it's, as I said, that analogy of the window and how it becomes visible to the regulator. What are you reporting out the door? Does that actually match with your deal source? And we're seeing firms being challenged on, okay, well, what you're reporting out the door, does it match your deal source? Are they the same thing? And that full front to back reconciliation is becoming more and more important.
Grant, thank you. That's I think an excellent framing of this discussion. We've already run over half an hour on what we thought was going to be a 20-minute conversation. So I will close this episode off here, and then we'll pick up some of these themes in our next episode. But I think the message to me is clear. That this isn't just a reset; it's a rethink. And you got, as part of that rethinking, you have to work out what is your roadmap going to be. That this is a multi-year change process with the amount of pressure, with the potential consequences, with the risks and all the regulatory challenges around the AI use that they're bringing in. We want to move more and deeper into these subjects, and this season gives us a chance to do that with experts like you guys. So I can only say thank you very much to both of you. It's been fantastic having this dialogue. In the next episode, we want to move into that, digging into what machine readable really means in practice and what matters and why some of these tactical fixes won't work. So all the analysis we've been talking about, at least what I referenced, is part of our upcoming new newsletter called the RegTech Edge. So we'll be getting that out there along with some of these discussions, and there will be research that's coming out with First Derivative. Stay tuned for how that gets out, and if you want early access, let us know. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, PJ.
You've been listening to Regcast, delivering regulatory clarity, AI precision, and market trust. Please subscribe and share. It helps more people join this vital conversation. Find all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or at regrissolutions.com.